Welcome, everyone. I'm Holly Corbett. I'm the VP of Content and Consciously Unbiased, a movement to build EQ in the workplace. So, we have a special guest with us today, Michelle Gielan, positive psychology researcher and author of the new book, Resilient Optimism. This is a must read. It's coming out September 22nd. So, Michelle's work focuses on helping people navigate stress and uncertainty, something I think we could all use a little help with in these uncertain times, with greater clarity and resilience. Michelle she formerly served as an anchor on CBS Morning News before getting a positive psychology degree from the University of Pennsylvania. She's also the author of a best-selling book, Broadcasting Happiness: The Science of Igniting and Sustaining Positive Change. In her latest book, Michelle shares why lasting optimism is not something you have to be born with, nor is it blind positivity, but rather something you can practice based on small actions and repeatable behaviors. So, Michelle's with us today to talk about exactly that. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into this book, which I really appreciate the blend of stories and concrete action steps, and science that are all together in the book. It's got a lot of really great usable advice. And before we begin, I just wanted to ask you, what do you mean when you say resilient optimism?
Yeah, great question. So, traditional optimism is understood to be having an expectation of good things to happen. It's really a mindset. Resilient optimism is optimism that stays strong when it's tested. It's so easy to start with an optimistic mindset when things are good, new beginnings, new school year, new project at work. But what happens when the first plan fails or the challenge lasts longer than we expected, or we are just simply exhausted? So, resilient optimism stays strong throughout that. And the way we do that is it's not just a mindset, it's actually a set of behaviors that help get you through that messy middle. They reinforce the optimism and then they help keep your brain moving forward.
I love that. So it's not only a feeling, but it's actually something that you can practice in daily
Absolutely.
life in order to kind of maintain it. Um, in the book, you talked about some studies you did with Ariana Huffington, on the impact that negative content has on mood and performance, and it got published in Harvard Business Review. Can you tell us how that research that you were doing sparked you to write the book, Resilient Optimism?
Yeah, it has changed the way that I do my mornings, how I get caught up in the news. I mean, I used to anchor the news. And then when I did this study, it gave me a different look at all of this. So we did two studies. The first one, we split research participants into two groups. One was exposed to 3 minutes of negative news, the other 3 minutes of neutral news. And then we tested them on mood and performance. And as you might expect, we saw a drop for those that were exposed to the negative news in some of those measures. But what made the study amazing was we didn't test them right after exposure. We tested them 6 to 8 hours later. So, 6 to 8 hours later, as they're picking up their kids from school or they're finishing up their workday, those that had been exposed to 3 minutes of negative content as compared to neutral had a 27% increased likelihood of reporting their day as negative. So it shows us that that small shift in our behavior and what we consume can have a lasting impact. But I think the follow-up study was significantly more hopeful, and it actually was part of the impetus for why I wrote the book, which is for that study we split participants into two groups. One was exposed to a serious problem. So in this case, it was rising food insecurities in major cities. The other group was exposed to the same problem, but they also read about solutions that we can all take to help alleviate this issue. That group, 20% better on creative problem solving tasks later on in the day. Just thinking about solutions, whether you're engaging them or not, made these people smarter and better at whatever they're doing. So, for leaders, when we're leading a team, it's okay to talk about the problem. And actually, we should be talking about the problem. That's resilient optimism. But we also need to ask, what's the next step? How can we move the brain forward? What progress have we made? And what is the thing that we do right now that helps solve this situation, even if it's just the start of the solution?
Wow, it's so fascinating, how our mind can impact how we experience the world. And I think our minds are geared to keep us safe and think about what could go wrong. So I love the idea of really being mindful and intentional that, yes, it's okay to recognize the problem, but make sure you're thinking about the bigger possibilities and the solutions, because that's how you sustain optimism. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that mindset set shift that's needed to sustain resilient optimism?
Right now, we are being bombarded by information from all channels, right? At work, at home, on social media, on the news. And what I'm seeing is that the volume of problems is louder than the volume of progress. That has a massive impact on our brain. And when we know from literally decades of research that optimism is an incredible performance advantage, we want to be engaging in these behaviors. I mean, we see across the board that when our brain's in a positive and optimistic state, it fuels literally just about every single business, educational, well-being outcome that we can possibly measure. 31% higher levels of productivity, 37% higher sales, 40% greater chance of promotion over the next year, a 23% drop in stress-related symptoms, and the list goes on and on. So it's literally our best investment when we think about how we spend our time, how we navigate our attention, what we consume. When we make those small changes to how we do all of that, we actually see that not only do we fuel our well-being and happiness and performance in the moment, but we also set ourselves up really well long term.
Yeah, and can you share a time in your own life, where you experienced that mindset shift of where you really had to sustain that resilience in the long haul? Because it's easy to do it, right? And if everything's going well, but when
Yeah.
things don't go as planned, how do you keep that mindset going?
Well, so it was Super Bowl Sunday, 2018. My husband and I were watching the Super Bowl, the first half, with our son, who at the time was 4 years old. And the plan was to watch the first half and maybe a little bit of the halftime show and then go to bed. And that's fine.
Mhm.
Except the only thing is my water broke. I was only 7 months pregnant. So my husband did what any loving husband would do when his wife's water breaks during the big game. He got me an Uber. No, his friends literally called him husband of the year and wouldn't let him live it down. But I do defend him because first of all, it was our son's bedtime. But the other thing is he got me an Uber XL. So he treated me inside. But so I get to the hospital, and at that point, I had no idea exactly how serious this was. And that's where the doctors explained to me, being 30 weeks pregnant, we really want to keep you pregnant as many days as possible beyond this because every day matters for the baby. 6 days
Mhm.
later, I have an emergency C-section. Our daughter's born. Her name's Zoe. She is just 3 pounds, 7 ounces. She was so small that her entire hand fit around just the last section of my finger.
Oh.
And so and alongside Sean, we got thrust into this 50-day journey through the NICU full of uncertainty. I remember listening to the monitors and watching in the beeping and this information on the board and trying to synthesize all of it to predict that everything was going to be okay. And it was in that moment that I realized that the optimism I had been studying, it became deeply personal and it was missing an element of it, which was the behavior.
Mhm.
So I started to see that, you can say, yes, this is really scary. And there's something I can do here. I can ask the doctor a next question. I can support my husband. I can be there for our son. I can be by my daughter's bedside. There are behaviors that we can do to help keep ourselves hopeful and optimistic. So after that experience, I started to look at optimism differently and in particular about how to build that resilience into it. So it's not just waiting for a feeling. We don't need the feeling, actually. We can behave in an optimistic way, and then the feeling can hopefully follow. Oh, and I should say, because in the spirit of the whole story, is that she's 8 years old and thriving and awesome. So everything worked out really well. But when we're in that messy middle, it is hard to see the ending. So we want to believe that our behavior matters and what we do next makes a difference, even when we can't see how the situation will resolve.
Mm. Oh, I'm so happy she is thriving and she's 8 years old. My firstborn was in the NICU too, so I know how scary that
Yes.
can be, but I think, you know, that experience that you being able to have these life experiences combined with all of the science, all of the research that you've done makes this book, Resilient Optimism, come across as just so real world, right? Sometimes it's just like ideas up in our head, but the action steps in this book are things that you can practice. And it makes you feel like you have more control over the outcomes because you're controlling your mindset. And I think that's really, really big. I mean, how do we infuse resilient optimism at scale? Like we can do it with ourselves, but how do we do it at scale within the workplace? And then what is the impact of doing so?
Well, so I've had the blessing of working with so many professionals in all kinds of organizations, healthcare, education, corporate environments, and they're amazing people, right? Because they grab onto this research, they get into the messiness of applying it in a real world environment, and I get to stand alongside them through that process and then hear their stories. So this book is packed with stories and ways we can put it into practice that I have seen work and dramatically change environments. One corporate example that I love, we worked with a sales team. When we walked in there, the the president of the organization was like, "Why are we talking about these soft topics during a business conversation?" But he was a numbers guy. I presented him with the same numbers that we're talking about. He's also a sports guy. The idea of writing the playbook of basic business practices and applying positive psychology onto it, he felt like a coach. He was excited. So anyway, to their credit, they rewrote how they did meetings. They thought about how they make phone calls when they're doing outbound sales and all these other small ways in which we can apply the research. 18 months later, we tracked them over time. Their new insurance application rate went up by 237%. Their gross revenues went up by 50%, which for them was $300 million. So
Wow.
that president that gave pushback, he now sees not only how, and he's the biggest proponent of positive psychology, but he saw that what it did for his organization from a business perspective, but also what it did for the well-being, the work and life satisfaction of the employees there. It changed the culture. But I don't think you need to be in a leadership position per se to actually make an incredible influence on the people around you. We actually see that people are very, very influential. I scour the research because I would often get asked, who's more powerful? Is it the positive person or the negative person when it comes to creating culture? So
Mm,
they're thinking of their business teams, they're thinking around the dinner table, sometimes with that negative family member.
mm,
And what I came to see, it's not the most positive person, but it's not the most negative person either. It is the person who is most expressive of their mindset. So if we're
mm,
thinking optimistic things, we need to speak up. I recently did a new pass on the data we have. We have an 11-year data set of more than 25,000 professionals worldwide. And what I found is something that to me is exceptionally surprising. So people are still 8 and 10 over time calling themselves optimists, but
mm.
they are significantly less likely to behave that way. And what I mean specifically is they're less likely to express their optimism. When someone presents a new idea at work, they're less likely to speak up and say something encouraging or positive. When they think something optimistic, generally, they're less likely to tell anyone about it. When they start a conversation, they're significantly less likely to start with something positive. Optimism isn't just a personal belief. These are signals that we're sending to other people. This is evidence of progress, of the ways in which our behavior matters, the things that are working in our environment. If we're not saying that stuff, we're losing out on the benefits. So I think the number one thing I would say for leaders is see how much you are cataloging the good that's happening, expressing it, getting your team to express it, not in some irrational way, but in a rationally grounded, resiliently optimistic way, because that is fuel that helps keep your team seeing progress and possibility and moving forward.
I love that. So it's just being more intentional in communicating the optimism. In the book, I think you had like a 15-minute daily check-in to talk about like a small win. And I thought that was so impactful because it's a concrete practice you can do every day with, your team, and
Yeah.
you're focusing on the wins in the moment instead of some big far away event that's going to happen. So it makes it more tangible. So many ideas were running through my head when you were talking. It consciously unbiased. We say people are the greatest resource that a company has, right? Companies are made up by people, and so when we look at these like lowering engagement levels, this type of a mindset, this type of optimism and focusing on being more solution oriented is so important, because I think that teams feel more energized when they're moving towards what is possible in terms of solutions rather than focusing on all of the problems in front of them. And I'm curious, is optimism contagious? If people start voicing it, does it become more of a practice in the workplace?
Yes, absolutely. The more that we have team members talking about the good, the meaning embedded in the work that we're doing, the things that they're grateful for, the progress that they've seen, when they voice that, they actually strengthen that culture that says, "Hey, we talk about this stuff here. We don't keep it to ourselves, and we definitely don't criticize." So, at no point do I want anyone to take away from any of this that we should be ignoring problems, because
Mhm.
that's then irrational. So, my husband, his name is Sean Acor. If you've run into his work, he is also in this line of work. We're two married happiness researchers, which
Oh, I love it.
so he has a wildly popular TED talk called "The Happy Secret to Better Work," and if you last for 12 minutes straight, that's him. He's very funny. So
Mm.
he came home one time from a talk and he said, "You won't believe what happened." I said, "What is it?" He said, "So I give this talk on the power of optimism at this company. The CEO loved the research and came up to me afterwards and wanted to give me a ride to the airport so we could talk about how to embed it in his organization." And of course, Sean said, "Sure, that sounds great." Gets in the guy's car, clicks on his seatbelt. The CEO gets in and doesn't put on his seatbelt. So after a while, the seatbelt bell is going off, reminding him. And Sean, again, very funny, thinks he's making a joke. He turns to the guy, he goes, "Oh, so you don't wear seatbelts?" The guy's like, "No, man, I saw your talk. I'm an optimist."
Oh, no.
Sean's like, "No, you're something else, right?" So what optimism doesn't stop cars from hitting us. It doesn't stop reality from negatively impacting us. What we're talking about here in the research and throughout this book is rational optimism. You're taking a realistic assessment of the present moment, but you are also maintaining the belief that your behavior matters, and especially when challenges strike. So rational optimists, they see the setback for what it is, but they believe that that's actually just the start of the story.
Right. Like, we cannot control the things that life throws our way, but we can control how we show up for them. So that seatbelt example was such a great example. In the book, you talk about these like five very specific behaviors that build this kind of deep rooted optimism, as not kind of this pie in the sky idea, but to
Yeah.
integrate it into the core of who we are. And people, again, will have to read the book to get the deep dive. But can you briefly describe what these five core behaviors are?
Yeah. So the first one is probably my favorite because it's the easiest, which is recalibrating your perspective. We are bombarded by all kinds of information, as we talked about, and so this is about being really conscious about reorienting your attention to the good that is around you. The best example I saw, I met a nurse. Her name is Grace. She was in the NICU. The day I met her, two patients coded before noon, and one actually didn't make it. And it was a hard day. So when she had those hard days, what she would do is she had an in case of emergency folder. She filled them with notes and pictures from patients, caregivers, and families, just basically thanking her for the work that she did. And she would look through it and remind her brain of the ways in which her behavior mattered. And what I love about this practice is this folder is not going to tell her that everything's going to be peaches and roses in the ICU, but instead, what it's doing is it's just steadying her. It's putting her back on the floor with a different mindset. And because she was a senior nurse there, she was impacting other younger nurses who were like, "How are you staying so steady in the midst of all of this?" And she said, "Let me show you. This is my
Mhm.
practice." So there's lots of
Love
practices
that.
that we can use that help recalibrate our mindset. The other one that I think has had a big impact on me has been rethinking my relationship with stress. There was a phenomenal study done by my husband, Sean Acor. He did it in partnership with Yale researchers, Ali Crum and Peter Salovey. They went to a big bank, UBS. They worked with stressed out managers, split them into two groups. One group they put through a stress management training, which is basically how you deal with stress. The other, they introduced how stress can actually be enhancing to the body and mind, and how you can see, own, and use that stress to your advantage. So basically, rethinking your relationship with stress. And
Mhm.
then they track them over time. And what they found is later on, during a very stressful time in their business, as compared to the control group, that experimental group who had rethought the relationship with stress reported a 23% drop in stress related symptoms like headaches, backaches, and fatigue. So, how
Mm,
we do this is stress doesn't often show up and say, oh, hi, I'm stressed. It shows up in other ways, right? And we all know this. It shows up as anger, anxiety, worry, all of those things. And the reason that we are feeling those things is because most likely there's a deep meaning behind the stress. So, when we're feeling stressed, the biggest and easiest thing we can do is to stop and say, a, wow, I'm stressed right now, to acknowledge it. And then B, what is the true meaning behind the stress? I worked with a mom and she said, oh, yeah, my son didn't show up for curfew. He's a new driver. And I felt completely stressed sitting there at 11:07, wondering where he was. And she said, and then after hearing this research and thinking about how to process it in my own life, she said, I stopped. I said, wow, I'm stressed. And what's the real reason? It's because of his safety. It's not that he's not listening to me or all the other reasons that I could come up with. It's because I want to make sure he's safe. And she said that realization alone changed the conversation that she ended up subsequently having with him when he came through the door. She wasn't just showing up mad, like, you're not listening to me. She
mm,
said, hey, this is why this is meaningful. So next time, can you drop me a text? And he did.
mm.
And, it just changed the dynamics. So those are two examples. But I really looked at the comprehensive set of behaviors of resilient optimists because it's small tweaks and it makes a massive difference.
Yeah, and that what you were just saying about stress. So stress isn't inherently good or bad. It's a clue, and recognizing that you're feeling stress, and then the feeling underneath it to be able to unpack what the stress is trying to tell you is a way to reframe it. Right?
Right.
Is that the key?
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, if you know that your kid is not doing well in school, um, I mean, that's stressful. If you know that a child's not doing well in school, I mean, of course we do have care for that, but it's a different kind of feeling because the relationship you have with your child, their future, it's all deeply meaningful, right? So it's just understanding that stress can tell us some things about the situation that help us process it in a different way.
Mm. Yeah, and I wanted to circle back to, this idea that you said in the beginning about negative content and Ed really um, thinking about the messages that we're exposed to. I mean, obviously, in today's day and age, with all of these different messaging platforms and the news and social media being fueled by polarization, we're getting a lot of like what's not working, like a lot of problems, a lot of negativity. How do you have any advice, especially in the workplace when people are really trying to be productive, on how to kind of control the content, better control your mindset and the content that you are being exposed to?
Well, I would say two things. First of all, really be conscientious about what the narrative is. So if someone is, you have a meeting with a team regularly, let's say, and people are coming to you quietly to tell you stuff on the
Mhm.
side, then there's a communication problem going on there. Either the team's not getting along, or they don't feel comfortable expressing, or whatnot. So there is a narrative that needs to be fixed there, and we can do that by modeling positive expressivity and also opening up the floor to have a constructive discussion about what is going on. If someone presents a new idea and we don't speak up and say something, for instance, um, our optimism has no impact on the room.
Mhm.
Meanwhile, the guy sitting next to us is like, oh, I've got 12 reasons why this is not going to work. That's now what becomes the conversation. So when
Mm,
optimists go quiet, pessimists get the floor. We want to be able to talk about the negative, absolutely, but we also want to have this drumbeat of optimism. And so leaders have that ability because they lead meetings, because they're constantly talking to their teams and guiding them to guide their brain in those better directions. And then the other thing is, what I've seen a lot of success with in the corporate work that I've done is making progress visible. A lot
mm,
of times we have wins, things are going well, but you wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it from going into the office. You wouldn't know it from talking to people because everyone's brains are so focused on what we have to do next. They're not taking a minute to focus on how far they've come. Remember working with a woman who she's a fundraisers and I mean, that's a hard job, right? Especially in
Yeah.
today's climate. And she said, every time I get a phone call with somebody who could be a potential donor, I put a peg up on the wall in this one particular place. Every time I get a meeting with somebody, I have another cluster of pegs. And then every time I actually get a donation, I, of course, add it to the tally. She said, but the thing that's actually been the most fuel is I have pictures of all the students that these scholarships have been able to help posted on my
Mm.
wall, and that to me is a reminder of why I do this work. And so all of that made the progress visible and reconnected her with the meaning in her work. And it changed how she processed the stresses of the work and everything that she did.
That's a really brilliant idea to kind of display your impact in a visual way because those visual cues will help keep you motivated and kind of looking towards where you need to go. So thank you for sharing that. I like to close our conversations with a specific action step or micro progression, as we call them at Consciously Unbiased, that leaders of all levels can do to help cultivate resilient optimism for themselves and also for their teams. What's one thing you would say that people could do today?
One thing I love, and this is a practice that you can do yourself or you can adapt for your team. During the busyness of the pandemic, I adopted a practice called Best Moments. I started to send my husband, Sean, a text message every evening that were 3 to 4 good things that happened from the day. The reason I eventually realized I love this practice is that I'm not asking, was today good? I was asking, what was good today? And so this practice is accessible to us even when the days are not good or stressful or there's been too much going on. And I would focus on little things. Zoe gave me a hug. I played pickleball with Leo. I tried a recipe and it was so much fun. It actually worked and tastes good, right? Just small things. But what that's doing is it's not just important for the cataloging of all that information. If you're like me, I forget what happens yesterday. I don't know, So these are mental triggers to remind me of the good. But the other thing that I think is really powerful is we're training our brain for the 23 hours and change that we're not engaged in this practice to see the world differently. So, as leaders, if we want to bring this practice to our teams, we can start off meetings by asking people to tell me one way your colleague has made your life easier lately. Tell me about one small win that everyone here might not have heard about. Setting the stage for people to continually be expressing good things, that teaches them, hey, this is what we value around here. This is what we'd like for you to speak up about. And I'm going to open up a space for it. So it's not just like, oh, we got to get to that next thing. Let's tackle this next problem. We're actually building in this into our day. And it literally takes 1 to 2 minutes a day. It's not a huge commitment.
That sounds like a great practice for both work and life in general. And it is just so fascinating that yes, people say focus on the positive, but by doing these little action steps, you can
Yeah.
actually retrain your brain. So thank you for sharing that. And where can our audience go to? So this book comes out on September 22nd. Where we'll drop the link on how to pre-order the book in the comments, but where can our audience go to find out more about you, Michelle?
We made it really easy. Resilientoptimism.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and I look forward to putting these practices into place.
Thank you, Holly. You're wonderful. And I so appreciate you having me on the show. Thanks.
Loved having you. Bye.